Storytelling Strategy Series. This is brought to you by the Grandview Group in behalf of the Life Story Library Foundation. I'm Cassie Ashton, and I will be your host for this series. We're really excited about this series and about the opportunity of bringing more attention to the Life Story Library Foundation's, which goal is to help ordinary people collect and preserve their stories. And in an effort to do that, we thought it'd be a great idea is to make sure that people really knew how to use stories in better ways. Our host today is Karen Dietz. I mean, not our host, our guest today is Karen Dietz. Now, Karen Dietz is definitely a veteran in the storytelling world. She has done all kinds of things. I first met Karen years and years and years ago at a Storytelling Network conference when she was the executive director. And she was wonderful then in being able to nurture storytellers in, how to build businesses. And now, as she has switched her focus and is helping business owners use stories. And in that vein, she has been an amazing effort in writing a business storytelling for dummies. So really, any of us do that. She has a wonderful website that you can receive all kinds of resources to help you on your path, and that's the Just Story It website. But with no further ado, please, we'd like to bring on Karen Dietz so that she can help us with our stories in business. Karen, welcome to Storytelling Strategies.
Oh, thank you, Cassie, so much for such a wonderful introduction. I really appreciate it, and I'm so thrilled to be here today talking with everybody about stories and business and how we can really leverage stories to help us in our work and in our companies. So let's get started. I titled this webinar, What's Your Story? And it's really all about what do we need to know about storytelling to grow our impact and our influence and our income out there in the marketplace as we're toiling away in the trenches doing all of that good business work that we're doing. So I'm going to start just moving through the slides here. And I think, the first big question that everybody has is, of all the things I could be doing in business, why do I need to pay attention to storytelling? Because it's not intuitive that we would automatically need to pay attention to stories and working with stories in our business. But let's just consider this. There was the Significant Objects Project, which was a research project conducted a few years ago. And the group of researchers, they wanted to know what would happen if they picked up some items from garage sales, things that cost maybe $1, $1.25. What would happen if they took those items, attached a personal story to them, and then resold them? Would that story make any difference? And it did. And they bought a bunch of items. One, for example, was a statue of a horse's head. It cost them 99 cents to buy it at the garage sale. And they wrote a story, a personal story, that they then attached to that, and then they put both the story and the statue on eBay. And it sold for $63. Now, just think, that is a 6,300% increase in price just because of a story. And then another example is Columbia University. Their alumni group was in a fundraising cycle. They wanted to raise some money, so they actually put a story on their website of someone who had received the services of the Alumni Association and kind of the difference that had made in that person's life. And within the 24 hours, that single story raised $6.8 million. Right? Now, can we expect those kinds of results in our own businesses? Well, maybe. And what I know about working with stories is that it will certainly get you a lot further along in your bottom line results than if you are doing business without stories. So why is that? Well, it's because they are our richest and most efficient means we have in our sphere of influence to immediately create a connection between two people. And we know business is built on relationships and connection. Stories build trust and credibility and believability. And here's something else really important is that stories, when crafted well for business, actually move people to action. And this is different than Hollywood stories, which are entertaining for sure. But in business, we need to also have our stories move people to action, and there are specific ways to do that. Stories, hands down, are your best ways to convey vision, right? To make that vision that you have come alive and be real for people. It's a way for your values to actually be lived, to demonstrate that they are lived and alive. And they're a great way to spark change in people. And also, stories are where you find really your unique selling proposition, what makes you different than all of your competitors. And bottom line, as I shared in the two examples that I just did, they grow sales and they grow business. But let's pause here and really understand what makes stories work, because the more you understand about how stories work, then the more command you will have over your own storytelling. So what I'm going to share next is not a business story, but I use it in business all the time to demonstrate why stories work so well. So we're in 1950, and we're in Paris. And it's one of those gorgeous spring days, the kind of a spring day where you can smell that new growth on the air, and yet you can still feel the chill of winter that's there. And it was just such a day like that, blue skies, white puffy clouds, where a poet lived. And the poet said, oh my gosh, I've got to go on a walk today. So gorgeous. And so he did. And as he's walking along the streets in Paris, he notices up ahead of him a beggar. And as he gets closer, he sees that it's a blind beggar. He is got a cardboard sign in front of him that says, blind, no pension, please give. There's a cup on the sidewalk in front of him also, and he's sitting next to this coffee and pastry shop that has a bell above the door. A lot of people going in and out of the shop. Well, the poet stops to ask the beggar, how's it going? And the beggar goes, oh, geez, this is just terrible. People are so busy. They're rushing by. They're certainly not stopping and talking to me, and they're definitely not putting anything in my cup. So I really don't know how I'm going to make it. And the poet said, well, may I change your sign? And the beggar kind of goes, well, geez, I don't know, but, well, okay, but on the back, so if I want to turn it around again, I can. So the next thing the blind beggar hears is the scratch of the poet's pen on that piece of cardboard. And when the poet's done, he sets that cardboard sign back down in front of the beggar, bids him good day, and continues on his walk. Well, it's a few weeks later, another one of those gorgeous spring days. The poet says, oh, I've got to go on a walk today, too, and takes the same route he did before. And sure enough, sees the beggar sitting same place he was before, and he's up ahead of him sitting on the sidewalk. So the poet decides to check in with the beggar and see how he's doing. And the beggar says, wow, he says, it's great. People are stopping and talking to me. They're putting coins in my cup. Sometimes I have to empty it 2-3 times a day. And the poet says, oh, I'm so happy for you. That is so great. And makes to say goodbye and continue on his walk. But the beggar says, wait. Stop before you go. I've got to know, what did you write on my sign? And the poet says, oh, that was easy. I simply wrote, spring is coming. but I will not see it. Yep, that's what he wrote. Spring is coming, but I will not see it. So let's talk a little bit about this story. And interestingly enough, this is a true story. The poet was Jacques Prévert, and he was living in Paris, and this happened to him. And he told it to a colleague of mine who teaches up in San Francisco State University. And when I heard her tell it, her name is Sunwolf, I asked her if I could tell it because I thought it was such a great story that shows why stories work so well. And she said yes, and so now I have the opportunity to tell it to you. And it's also been made into a video. It's a YouTube video now, and it's very popular. So anyway, it's a little background about the story. But let's talk about why it works. So what I always ask groups after I tell this story is I ask them, well, first of all, what images came to your mind as you were listening to the story? You know, what did you see in your mind's eye? What happened for you with that story? And you know, everybody sees something a little different. And there are no right answers, but it's really great, the variety of things that people see. Some people see the poet. Some people see the beggar. Some people see Paris. Some people see the clouds. And some people see these things in minute detail. Not everybody, as I said, sees the same things. When I ask them, well, what did you smell? Did anybody smell anything? Well, some people say they did smell things. They smelt the air, that spring air. They smelt the coffee, or maybe the croissants. Maybe sometimes they say they even smell the beggar. When I ask them what they heard when I told this story, some people say, oh, well, I heard the bell above the door, or I heard traffic in the streets, or I heard the scratch of the pen on the cardboard. Then I ask if anybody felt anything tactilely, you know, through the kinesthetic senses. And some people say, oh, I felt what that spring day feels like. And then when I ask if anybody felt any emotions, oh, various people say, yeah, I felt happy, or I felt sad, or I felt hopeful, or I felt glad at the end. Right? So we have a range of emotions that we all experience. And what this tells us is that stories tickle all of our senses, and they engage the imagination really quickly. We see images, we smell things, we taste, we touch, we feel. We have this sense of anticipation. Oh, what's coming next? And what's happening is that we are accessing our personal memories and meaning. In other words, each person is filling in the details from their own minds. I didn't describe the poet to you. I didn't describe the beggar to you. If you saw either one of those people, you were filling in the details from your own mind. That means you were owning the story. You were living the story right as I was telling it. And because we are experiencing the story through our senses, and we have this sense of anticipation, which is, you know, this sensory information is coming from the right brain, or where the imagination rests, and anticipation is coming from the left side of our brain, and more of our analytical brain. We can talk about storytelling being a whole brain, whole body experience. And that's the richest form of communication that we have. And so it's a very, very powerful vehicle that we have to use. And so my job as the storyteller is simply to trigger your senses and your imagination so that your mind fills in the details and you become part of the story. So what does this mean for business, though? You know, for years I've wanted neuroscientists to take brain scans of somebody telling a story and somebody listening to a story at the same time, and to see what showed up. And a few years ago, they actually did that. And here's what they discovered. That as the teller was telling the story, all areas of the brain were being lit up. As the listener was listening to the story, the exact same areas of the brain were being lit up as the tellers. There was one difference, though, in that the listener's brain, there was another area that was being activated, and that was the area of the brain that was anticipating what is coming next. And then they discovered that the amount of time it took between the teller's brain being activated and the listener's brain being activated was like just a second or two, right? Hardly any time at all. That means that there was an immediate connection that was created between the teller and the listener. And we have, so connecting is really, really important. The other few things that storytelling does is it creates story sparks. And what I mean by that is that when you hear a story from someone, most often it sparks a story in you that you want to share in return. And this is incredibly invaluable because this is where relationships start become formed. And then also it's really important, story travels. So how many of you feel as if you could tell that story about the poet that I just told? You could go home and tell it to your spouse or your kids. You could go at work and you could tell it to a colleague or a friend there. And that's because stories are very easy to remember and then retell. And when we think about that over a business, how great that is if you tell somebody a story about your business, you have just given them the ability to retell it outside of your presence. That's called word-of-mouth marketing, and we know how priceless and invaluable that is. And then the last point, number 4, is that stories are mini simulations. And this has been documented in the world of sales and storytelling, is that one of the best ways to have people understand the value and benefit of your product is to share a story about it, because then it's almost like a mini simulation of what your product and service is about. They get to try it on, sort of, so to speak, by listening to the story that you tell. So very, very powerful. So how do you start working with stories? Well, it's really all about getting your charm on, and that basically is a simple process for knowing how to work with stories in business. And charm stands for collecting, honing, applying, renewing, and mining. So the C is collecting. So first you have to collect your stories, right? Figure out the stories that you've got. You're actually surrounded by hundreds, if not thousands, of stories in your business. So the first thing is to start collecting them and start collecting certain things, certain kinds of stories that you want to be able to tell. Then the H stands for honing. Right? This is crafting your stories so that they move beyond just conversational storytelling, which we as human beings do all the time, and more into finely crafted stories that you know are really going to work for you, no matter who your audience is. Then the A is applying your stories. How do you want to use your stories in marketing, in presentations, in leadership situations, in branding? I mean, there's in knowledge transfer, like trainings and workshops. There's so many applications for storytelling that we want to be conscious about different ways we want to apply our stories. Then the R stands for renewing stories. We've all had the experience. We tell a story often enough, and then it feels like it's getting a little tired. So renewing your stories is about finding that juice that keeps it going, right? That keeps it exciting. Get that out. Keeps it exciting and keeps us engaged and interested in telling the story. Because if we're excited and engaged about telling it, then our audiences will be excited and engaged in listening to it. And then the last part of the process is M, which stands for minding your stories. And it's digging deep into your stories to find images and different graphic elements that you can use in marketing and branding. It's looking at archetypes and need states from customers. It's really understanding the stories at a deep level so that you understand what is sort of the buried treasure in your stories that can help you do your business and work your business better. So that's the process, the charm process for working with stories in any kind of a business. But given that, okay, so how do you really get started? And let's talk about collecting stories first. And as I said, there are hundreds, thousands of stories that you're surrounded by. How do you know which ones to pay attention to? And which ones you need to go after first? So there are basically 4 buckets of stories that I like to talk to organizations about. The first bucket is your origin story, right? How did you get started? There's great value in understanding why the business is in existence and what you're hoping to accomplish. Then there are also your future story, which is what difference are you creating on the planet today, right? How are you and your customers working together to make a better future? Then there are also why I stories, and these are stories about why do I show up at work? Why am I committed to this business? That builds trust and credibility, and these are the why I stories are often neglected because they're not well understood, but they're very, very important, particularly if you're raising funds. And then we have PR stories. These are people and results stories, and I think these are the easiest ones to pay attention to and to gather first. And these PR stories are really about the people that you are serving, right, your customers in the world, and the results that they have experienced from working with you, or they are about the people within your company and the amazing work that they do and how they have served customers in incredible ways. So I'm going to continue to talk about PR stories in the next couple slides, but I also want to talk about a few other things connected with those. So how do you, if I say, okay, let's look at people and results stories, you're going to ask, okay, well, how do I get started and what's a structure for a good story? Well, I want to first mention that there is a difference between story mechanics and story dynamics. And story mechanics are really important because these are tools like that we have at our disposal, like story structures and story elements. And just like an artist needs to know the paint brushes and the paints and the canvases that they have to work with, so we need to know our tools. That's different than story dynamics, though, which is how do I use the tools then to create relationships and to create influence and to build income. And what we're going to do now in this next slide is talk first about story mechanics, because without knowing story structure, you're not going to be able to get to that story dynamics part next. So again, we go back to our charm structure. Now this one is not the charm of the story process, it's the charm structure for how do we structure a good story. So we need a context, that's the C, which is basically the setting, right? A location, a time, a year. Give us the setting, right? Set the context for us. Then we have a hindrance, which is trouble or struggle or a challenge that we face. And the next part is the actions that we take to help resolve that challenge, to solve that struggle or trouble. From our actions, then we have results. Right? This is the result that happened. And oftentimes people think that that's the end of the story, but it's really not quite the end. The end is really the M, the meaning, right? Which is the interpretation that we bring to the story, this is what it meant to me. This is what I learned from this. These are the decisions that I've made because of this. This is what I'll never do again. And here's what I always will do in return. And the meaning statement is really, really important because that's a critical piece for helping move people to action. So when we follow the charm structure, it makes our storytelling a lot easier. I do want to say, however, that a lot of companies, when they're crafting their people and results stories by using the charm structure, they often have the focus is not quite where it needs to be. And the question to ask yourself to get the right focus is, who is the actual hero of your story? And oh, by the way, it's always the customer, right? So when I was working with a client, it was a politician, and I could tell that story one of two ways. I could tell you the story of how I worked with this person, and how, because we worked together, he went from being called the worst person that they'd interviewed by the Economist magazine all the way up to receiving standing ovations. Or I could tell it differently. And I could tell the story of this person's courage, persistence, and willingness to master storytelling. And how when he did that, he ended up with standing ovations and people lining up to talk with him after his talk was over. And because of that, he was able to make such a bigger difference in the world. And because of all of his efforts. That's a very different kind of a focus than here's how I helped somebody, right, where I'm the hero of the story. You can only tell those kinds of stories so many times before customers get weary of hearing those. So really, in here, and using the charm structure, always position your customer or the person, your employee, the person working within your company as the hero who is able to do amazing things. And you are the supporting cast in that story. So sharing your charmers, right? These are your stories that you've worked with the charm structure. And how do you do that? Well, first of all, practice, practice, practice. You know, you get to be a good storyteller by just telling stories. And if you want to, there's another part here that we don't have time to go into today, but if you want to learn how to listen and evoke stories, then you can go to my website and listen to my TED Talk, where I give a whole process for how to do that. And so it's sharing, it's practicing, and then the applications are, again, in marketing or branding when you're speaking, networking, workshops and trainings as a leader. And as a leader, there's some special things you need to know about storytelling to be really effective. It's about culture creation and culture change, in innovation and design and customer relationships and fundraising, all of those places to share your charmers. So what are some next steps for you to take? Well, the first thing is to find your story, right? Then to craft it using the charm structure, to practice telling it with a trusted someone, a friend or a colleague, and then applying that story in different settings. And then once you're done with that, go craft another one. And here are 3 steps you can take tomorrow. I really want to encourage you to take these steps. And the first one is, hey, listen. Listen for the stories that surround you. And then the next step is to remember all of the stories that you would like to tell about customers and staff. And then after that, brainstorm with your work team or others in your business about all the different kinds of stories that you could tell and that you want to share. And I should also tell you that, by the way, we think in stories we talk in stories. We master storytelling by the age of 3. We don't master analytical language till about the age of 7. So your birthright is storytelling. You already know how to tell stories. But just like writing or singing or dancing, if we want to be a good writer, we go take some writing classes. If we want to be a good singer, we want to take some singing classes. And if you want to be a good dancer, you take some dancing classes. We all know how to write, we all know how to sing, we all know how to dance, but if we want to get better, we need to take some classes. And so taking storytelling trainings or workshops is always a good thing so that we can get better at our innate abilities. So I hope you have some takeaways from today. And I think we're just about out of time, but it'd be great to write down a takeaway or two, put it in the chat box. I hope you got at least one great insight to bring home with you and start sharing. Here are some books and resources that are available for you on my website. I'm the author of Business Storytelling for Dummies. You can get that. I suggest getting it on Amazon. It's cheaper than what I can sell it to you on my website. I have a DIY story kit, which is all the worksheets and templates and guides that we weren't able to put into the Dummies book, but it's a great starter kit for how to bring storytelling into your business. And it's a downloadable PDF. And then you can check out my story curation also on business storytelling, where I've been collecting articles on all the best material I can find to help us all get better at business storytelling. And then you can also, I'd love it if you contacted me. I'd love to chat with you more about storytelling. I do trainings and speaking and coaching, and I'm here to help you in any way I can. So don't forget to reach out when you need to. So that's it. I think I'm done.
Wow, Karen, that was amazing. Now, I'm just kind of curious, wondering, does anybody have any questions or comments that they would like to make? If you can, you've just got your little chat box over here. Maybe it's not, or down here. Let me see if I can write that, see if anybody sees that. Any questions? Is there any questions anybody would like to pop up? Maybe we just got going so much. You know, I know for me, probably one of the most important takeaways is really that sense of allowing the customer to be the hero, but also just the power of stories in in connecting and creating that connection with people, that sparking connected to you. You know, we have Carolyn who says, love being charmed. Just love that. And now, again, I also want to point out that there on your screen, if you want to listen to Karen's podcast at the beginning of this series, just to let people know, we did do a podcast of hers, and again, more wonderful information. You can also get to her website by clicking on that link. And then there is a file that she has put down, so if everybody wants to just pop on that story structures, then, you know, she's has a file where she's giving you some more information today. So again, we are just thrilled to have Karen here and, you know, all the expertise that she has shared with us. We said that we were going to try to keep this to a half an hour, and so I think we'll do that. We appreciate everybody being online here with us today, and we'll continue to have everybody come in with story structures. We'd like to thank the Grandview Group and the Life Story Library Foundation for all of that they do in being here. And, you know, pay attention to your emails for our next Storytelling Strategies webinar in July. Thank you for attending.
Thank you all.